ready as I can be.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Terror Talk with Shannon and Kathy.
Can I, before we even get into this is just just popped up on my screen.
Yes.
And I might save it for another one of our episodes, but it literally says, don't be scared to spook your precious young children with horror films. I'm like, I love this. Whoever just put that is brilliant, because I started watching them when I was like way too young. But
yeah, and you turned out,
perfect. Perfectly morbid.
It turned out okay. It's fine.
All right, I'm gonna write this down. We're gonna talk about it next time.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll do an episode on children and horror films.
Traumatized kids with care.
I mean, I think that's a really valid thing. People do like when we talk about the children, so we could talk about children and horror films and kind of the debate.
The children.
The debate of that. But anyway, we're going to talk about Orphan Black, the series today, and more specifically, Helena, which is a character inside of this series that could be deemed more psychopathic. And so as part of our female psychopath series, we have now arrived at the Orphan Black series. Now, this is a series that was on from 2013 to 2017, 5 years. And each season has about 10 episodes, 45 minutes, very standard. It's a drama, it's a sci-fi, it's a thriller. It has a main female actress Tatiana Maslany, who plays 55 different
She's brilliant.
versions of herself.
She's brilliant.
She's brilliant, according to Kathy. And the basic premise, because we're not going to go into the full series or anything like that. The basic premise is that this character is this streetwise English orphan who was in foster care for many years, and she she has a foster brother, Felix, who's really awesome in this as well. And she also has a daughter and a foster mother that play a role. And she witnesses, at the very beginning of this series, the suicide of a woman who looks exactly like her. And as you might imagine, that's very interesting. But more interesting to her is that she decides to steal this woman's identity, and she's basically your petty criminal, and she goes into this woman's house and she's just going to steal the identity and live in her nice place and steal all of her money, because that's sort of what she does for a living. Her and her brother kind of go around living off of others and stealing and being criminals and all of that. And then unfortunately, it's far more complicated than that, because there's a boyfriend that comes home. This woman actually ends up being a cop. She's got to play that role. And so it begins. And then you go on 5 years of, all of a sudden it becomes a sci-fi where why did that woman look like me? And then there's another and another and another. And it becomes more nature versus nurture and clones and how they navigate things. And so that's how it goes. Now this was a pretty popular series, and there are a variety of kinds of reviews on this, and it's an older series now, so we're not going to go too much into that. But I think we can talk initially kind of about what we thought about it. I think, Kathy, this was the first time you had seen it.
Yeah.
And so what was kind of your experience watching it now?
It was easy for me to get through. I mean, there's 5 seasons. So, relatively quickly.
Yeah. I mean, there's only 10 a season, thank God. But
they're full hour-long episodes, and it's a lot of content because the show is heavy, and there's a lot going on, and more clones, as the series goes. I found it to be always changing its pace, and when you think you're figuring it out, it turns another corner. And I was just so enamored by not only the fact that she could play all of these characters. She has, by the way, her background is really diverse. So, it was just like Shannon, you and I had talked about, this is the perfect casting for her because of all the different the cultural identities that she has. Mm-hmm. But how in depth she went with each of these characters that she played, these were not tropes. These were not surface. There was a storyline and a depth to each one of these characters. And all of the supporting characters, whether you liked them or hated them, you were invested in the story. At least I was. So I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad. Yeah, her performance was epic in that sense, like very unique and very interesting, and at the time, like, wow, amazing. And in 2016 she won an Emmy for a particular episode where all the clones are in that episode and they're all in like a dinner scene, like it was crazy. Yeah, and I agree with you. You never in this series, whether you like it or hate it, you never have to wait long for the plot to do something. It's very plot driven, and even though it's very character driven in the sense that there's all these clones and all these characters and you're trying to follow, which I think is a criticism, is like they can get very in the weeds with like, why are we going down this lane now? Why are we, there's just a lot. So it gets kind of convoluted and hard to follow sometimes, and it gets, I would say, fatiguing. You can get some fatigue. I wouldn't binge it.
I would take, what I would do is I'd watch a season, and then towards the end of each season, where like, let's say the first 5 episodes of a season I could watch like every day. And then
take a moment.
The last 5 I would do every couple of days.
That's
and then
great.
I'd go on to the next season.
And then take a pause.
And take a pause between
think about
seasons.
It. Yeah.
And then,
think about it, whether you liked it or not, what kind of happened. And I think that's a great way to go. And I know you started because we plot out our content, months in advance. And every now and then we make a last minute shift if something happens. And I think that's our prerogative, damn it. That's our creative license. But we also, for these bigger series and things, we plot them out months in advance. And so that's a really awesome, if you've been waiting to kind of do this series and get into it, I would do that. And so, kind of lower budget, right? Because it's a UK show. But you never have to wait long for secrets to be revealed. And I like that about it, where the plot moves so fast and they're trying to do so much, which again can be a criticism, that if there's a secret someone's keeping from someone else, like they're doing a little like mistaken identity kind of bullshit, which I also hate, makes me really uncomfortable personally. Which is funny to say in a movie about clones, but they'll do like a little secret mistaken identity. Oh, we don't know who murdered and she's hiding it. It honestly, within 30 minutes, it's like everybody fucking knows. Like you don't ever have to wait too long.
They don't treat the audience like they're stupid.
No, they move really fast.
And the other thing I like too is, despite how dark the theme of this show is, they use a lot of humor. Yeah,
it's funny.
They use good humor.
Yeah, I do believe that it's not the series 24. It's not a series where you have to have a bit of a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor sometimes, even though you are dealing with some pretty, a serious issue if it were to be real. In general, overall, and this is kind of, I guess, my last thought on the whole series would be that this series has a great first season, like one of the best pilots ever. So that first episode is just like, what? And then I would say it has one of the best first seasons of television for that era, certainly. Now we've kind of transcended that so much, and I thought her tour de force was amazing to watch. I thought, she plays all the things. She has a gay character. She has a trans character. She has all sorts of other, like, from every walk of life kind of character. Different kinds of trauma, rich, poor, medium,
sick, well,
bound up, tight and anxious and relaxed and doesn't give a fuck. Like, she does all the things. So the acting, and I would say the visual effects challenge that was presented in this, because they actually didn't always use green screen or blue screen for those scenes when the clones, and they would have, especially like 3, 4, and 5th seasons, they would have these scenes where all the clones would come together. That would be like part of the climax. And I've watched a bunch on how they did a lot of that. And honestly, sometimes it was blue screen. Sometimes it was rotoing. They would roto everything out. And that is labor intensive, but also you can see her acting like by herself in a room full of 10 people. Like, we're going to watch it where there's 10 people, but they're all her and her brother and like maybe 2 other people. And then all of the other characters are her. And so you can see what they did with the visual effects, and they would literally like roto people out. They would have her. It's an amazing. So the acting challenge, the visual effects challenge, that first great season is amazing. I feel in general it got too unwieldy, in my opinion. They went too many different directions, too many subplots. And although I enjoyed watching all of the characters, I feel like in season 3 it completely fell the fuck apart. And by the end, I really enjoyed parts of how they wrapped it up, and other parts it was like I still felt like it was all over the fucking place, and it just kind of like. Yeah, it became like, very annoying for me.
Overly complicated. I think once they started to get into like the male clones and all of that too, it was a little bit much. But I tried to focus on still the center of it, and that the other stuff would kind of come and go for me. But
I was really just watching her.
I agree with you. Like, I think, the one clone story with her husband in the garage and all of that. I mean, but they were hilarious. They were great comic relief.
Again, that's why I couldn't binge it, is because I would just be like, what the fuck is going on now? Like, it got a little like, oh God, what the fuck? But if I just centered, like you said, if I just centered on like, well, I'm just going to do it for enjoyment purposes, and I'm just going to watch this performance, then I could get myself back into it. But if I'm really critiquing it, it fell the fuck apart in season 3 and never really recovered. But that's just me. That's just what I thought. So let's talk about Helena. One of the clones in this series is named Helena, and she is the off the deep end clone that was tortured and traumatized and kept in captive, used as an experiment, like all the bad things that could happen to a person. Helena has suffered them, and it's no shock that she comes out half-baked.
Fucking Helena,
so to speak. What did you think of Helena?
I loved her so much, and now
she's very popular.
So we have a joke around the house now. We call, I call my dogs babies, but I'll say babies. What are my babies?
What
are my babies?
She's Ukraine, and this character, this clone, is Ukraine. She ends up being Sarah's twin sister, because there's this whole plot around, the clones can't have babies, but of course Sarah has a kid, and then they figure out that Helena can also reproduce, where you're like, oh, great. Of course, she's the one that can reproduce. Crazy Von Crazy Town can have some babies. You'll see throughout the series, Helena's the one that we're like overly attached with the children.
She is very layered. I love,
she is.
I mean, they all are, like I was saying earlier, but I think you know that she is a fucking psychopath. At the same time, I have so much empathy for her.
Yeah, so that's why it's so great.
It's so great.
Because it's both. There's this layered thing to her character, because the first season, she's one of the main antagonists. And then after the second season, she's one of the main protagonists. So there's this real shift. And that's why I say like season 1 is just freaking phenomenal. And then it shifts and different things happen and all of that. But I would like to get into, more of her or not her. Do we think she's a psychopath? Does she fit what a psychopath is? What would we diagnose Helena with besides just being ridiculous in this whole thing? And I don't know if you want to start, but one of the first things I would think about would be reactive attachment disorder.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So they're all mostly foster kids. Like, these clones don't grow up in great situations. Some do, some don't. But Helena certainly didn't. Like I said, early captivity and tortured and using it as an experiment and tucked away in small spaces. And, reactive attachment disorder, or RAD, as psychology calls it, is basically a children's ability to form healthy emotional attachments is not there. Basically, it's stunted by a lot of things: neglect, abuse, usually very severe emotional neglect or abuse during early childhood. So what ends up happening in general is that managing your emotions becomes fairly impossible. Forming meaningful connections with others becomes really difficult. Seeking and showing comfort is a thing. It's very confusing and complicated for someone with RAD, and they're very fearful, anxious with people who want to take care of them. They can be highly suspicious as they get older. Like, there's a lot of nuance to that. I'm really just giving kind of broad strokes, and I would say that Helena fits that.
I would agree with that. I think a more obvious one for me would be post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yep.
I think this is someone who has had not only one, but multiple terrifying events in her life and has directly experienced it and also witnessed things. We see throughout the course of these seasons that she has flashbacks, she has nightmares, she has severe anxiety, she's hypervigilant, uncontrollable thoughts about what has happened to her since she was a child, and born into, and she was one of the first that knew she was a clone, like right away, but told she was unique in this, this way, at least what I remember.
The chronic PTSD.
The chronic PTSD.
Which isn't a thing, but yeah.
Well, what I would say is PTSD, okay, so without going in too much depth, we know that trauma is not the event, but the reaction to the event. What we know about resiliency is that someone cannot be truly resilient or bounce back if they haven't been given opportunities between each trauma to heal.
Right.
So if there's little time or resources, or they're marginalized in some way, resiliency is tricky because they're not given the same opportunity to build that resiliency, because the second they stand up, they get knocked down again with another trauma. As the series goes on, there is such a trajectory of chronic trauma that happens to her that she undoubtedly has PTSD.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also think, she's a salad of psychiatric issues.
She is.
Miss Helena. But I think she's probably a sociopath.
I think so.
Yeah. I think she fits in that thing. And I think the PTSD, the compound or complex PTSD, and, the attachment, she definitely has attachment issues, in my opinion, the reactive attachment stuff, because that can be like sociopath when you're older, right? So we're kind of talking about things that she would be diagnosed as a kid if she was assessed, which would be something like RAD or early PTSD, all of those things. And then later, she would have sociopathy and those kinds of tendencies, which is certainly not a diagnosis, but, she'd be diagnosed with antisocial personality and all of that when she got older. So we're really talking about two camps. Like, RAD is usually diagnosed very early, but like, obviously she wouldn't have been assessed because she was living in a box.
Right.
So, right. But the sort of sad, listless kind of appearance, the difficulty smiling, the difficulty with like comfort and seeking comfort, sort of the failure to meet those attachment milestones, behavior problem. Like, we would have seen all of that with Helena as a kid. So her attachment disorder, her PTSD, to me, kind of grew into, certainly she would have been conduct disorder as a teenager. She's certainly
blunted
antisocial.
Affect.
Yeah, blunted affect. So all of those attachment disorders and trauma, I feel like, grew into this recipe for antisocial personality. And the overly attachment to kids, overly attached to the kids. It's a TV show. So, they're taking a lot of license, obviously. And like I joked, it's like, this is a salad of all sorts of psychiatric issues that may or may not be realistic to see necessarily in one person. And this would be so rare. All of these things that we're seeing with Helena together are so rare. And then I saw some conversations online about the Stanford prison experiment with regards to how Helena is handled, meaning by way of her situations, and that she was like trained, she was one way, and then she's just like mimicking and group thinking and reacting from that perspective. And I don't think there's a correlation there personally.
I think those are not
but a
even
lot
related.
of people had conversations about that.
I mean, essentially what they're saying is like she was part of a simulation and that she was taught by being assigned a role.
Which we get. Because
Yeah.
I could see the correlation there. She's a clone. She is a simulated human being.
Yeah.
Like I see where they were going with that.
I don't see the connection though.
But it's an interesting conversation, I think. Maybe not for us to have, but they were having it.
I think it kind of minimizes the impact of her trauma. And it's just like, oh, she just became this because it was put upon her.
Which is interesting, right? That people would think that. Not that would be true, but that would be what people outside of our profession might liken it to, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, because if the quickest way to debunk that is in the prison experiment, once the experiment stops, the person goes out of that role. When she had the opportunity to leave that situation, she was still stable across that identity.
Yeah,
So
she sure was.
she didn't go, oh, this is not my role anymore. She doubled down.
Yeah, and I guess they would argue it was always her role and blah, blah, blah. But I think what you said earlier is more on the point where it minimizes the fact that they kept her in a cage.
Well, that's what we do, but we do that. Even clinicians forget to assess for trauma.
That's exactly my point. Like, that's totally why I wanted to bring it up, because I read that and I was like,
hello?
What? Do we as a society just don't think that like emotional neglect and abuse?
We don't. Why do you think it's not a reportable offense? You know?
Even in our own industry, like you're saying, our diagnoses for trauma are poor. And that's why the PTSD thing, I think you're talking about it more from like what we know about trauma and what we believe about trauma, and not so much about the DSM and what the DSM says is PTSD. Because it's our trauma diagnoses are shit.
Well, and we also don't yet have a diagnosis for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what,
what we would want to give her.
Vanderkolk has been trying to get into the DSM for so long, and if you read his book, The Body Keeps the Score, he talks about the attempts that he made to get the board and the association to jump onto this, and he's like, the fact that these other forms of trauma are being denied, it minimizes what maybe like we're over pathologizing children with other things when oftentimes it's trauma. We're seeing. So.
And that's why you're seeing all these things pop up like trauma-informed care. It's our industry's reaction to, we don't know what to do with this. Yeah. So like, let's all have all of these like offshoot programs and different things, EMDR, et cetera, that are very helpful to a lot of people, but aren't, don't have great diagnoses.
We become an industry of symptom management instead of the etiology and truly understanding the context. What do? We go, well, let me treat your symptom.
Yep.
Not helpful. Not in the long term.
No, not in the long term.
In the moment.
Yep.
Right? But
absolutely.
The etiology is completely ignored because now we go to this evidence-based, just treat the symptom.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think there's any other diagnoses that you would... any other way you would go with that? Is there a borderline thing going on there? I know a lot of people want to go that direction because it's kind of easy.
I don't think so. I don't get that from her. I got more of a sociopathic. I didn't find her incredibly... Yes, was she emotionally dysregulated? Yes, but not in the way that I would see in a borderline personality. I found her to be impulsive and reckless because of these other things, the antisocial piece. I don't think she has narcissistic personality disorder, but I do think that she has narcissistic traits that accompany her antisocial personality disorder. She's so blunted in her affect. To me, I personally do not see a borderline pathology.
Me neither. When I was like watching this and just kind of jotting notes as you go along, you'd kind of write all the ones down that have like emotional dysregulation. And because I kind of landed more on antisocial personality and conduct issues and sociopathy and all of that, I was like, okay, well then the root of it isn't going to be the borderline injury or the borderline condition. The root of it's going to be attachment. So
that's right.
That's why I went attachment disorder.
No, you're
to
right.
Antisocial.
The reactive attachment to the antisocial, because her reactions that might be looked at as a borderline dysregulation are not that. They're impulsive, they're aggressive, but not because she feels she's being abandoned. She actually doesn't give a fuck.
No.
She's like, I'm reacting because I'm protecting myself. And that's a very different, that's not an abandonment injury.
Agreed.
So,
yeah. Agreed. Thank you. And we don't have Orphan Facts with Kath today.
We don't. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Helena Facts with Girl.
You don't get to sing the song if you don't bring the fact. I'm sorry. You're cut off.
I did really, really love her as a character, though.
I did too.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like it was a worthwhile spend of some time
I think so.
To get that series under your belt. I think so too.
If anything, it's just a very well developed, if you're looking at just as a show, being able to write that amount of character development for one actor and watch her play them all out to the depth that she did, for me, is enough to watch the show.
Yeah. And female driven, the show is very female driven. So that is in our lane as well. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.